Hello bookworms! Today I'm going to be sharing my November TBR with you. I read a good amount of books in October. I'm actually really pleased with what I did read, even though I kind of went totally off my TBR, and there was a very good reason for it. And that kind of segues into the first book that I'm planning on reading in November, which is The Return of the King by Tolkien. This is the third book in the Lord of the Rings series, and I binge read the first two books in the series last month because I was invited to join the live show where we discussed The Two Towers on Beautifully Bookish Bethany's channel. So I really wanted to do that, but I had to read both the first and second book in like 4 days. I read them really quick, but they kind of like burned me out a little bit on reading after that because these books are pretty dense. They're not as long as I remember them being, but it still was like a lot to consume in such a short period of time. So I didn't end up getting to as many of the books that, as many of like the fantasy books that I had planned because I just needed some things that were like a little bit on the lighter side after reading so much Middle Earth. So some of those books that I did not get to are books that I am planning on reading in November. We're gonna see what happens this month, but the first book that I'm planning on reading is this one. I'm going to be joining the live show once again where we discuss Return of the King, and this will also be on Beautifully Bookish Bethany's channel, which I will leave a link to down below, and I'll actually leave a link to the Two Towers live show too in case you want to check that out. And they also did a live show for Fellowship of the Ring. I wasn't able to join that one because it was the day before my brother's wedding, so we were at his rehearsal dinner, but that was a great show too. I did watch it afterward. So this is number one, and I believe we said that the live show is going to be on November 12th if you would like to join us. I'm not 100% sure on the date, but I'm like pretty certain, so keep an eye out for that. Bethany's usually really good about like scheduling things in advance so it'll show up in your queue. But I'm really excited to read the conclusion to this. I said in one of my early videos this year that one of my goals was to reread Lord of the Rings, and then we were kind of getting close to the end of the year and I was like, I just don't know if it's going to happen, but it did. So I just have this one last book and then I will complete my reread, and I'm gonna be so happy that I finally did it because I've been wanting to reread these books for years. Next on my list is For the Wolf by Hannah Witten. I'd actually been saving this one for November. It just felt like a really good November read. This is the first book in a series, and I heard that it is a little bit heavier on the romance than other Orbit books tend to be, but I'm pretty excited to read it. I tend to like romance, so if you mix it with fantasy, I'll also enjoy that. But this follows a character named Red, who is one of the only second daughters to be born in this world, and it's for a specific purpose. She's supposed to be sacrificed to the wolf in the woods, and the hope is that by being sacrificed, the wolf will release the gods that they believe to be captured by this wolf. And also she has like this magic that feels like a curse, but once she gets to the Wilder Wood, I believe that she finds out that a lot of these things she grew up believing are not actually true. The wolf is actually a man, and the gods have actually kind of turned into monsters, and she needs to learn how to use her power, which she's now seeing as a gift, because if she doesn't learn how to like harness it, she's not going to be able to save the world. So sounds like it's going to be great. They already released the cover for the second book in the series, which I believe is coming out in summer of 2022. And yeah, I've been very highly anticipating reading this book, and I feel like woodsy, like atmospheric kind of reads are always what I prefer to read in November because it's kind of that like transition season between fall and winter. So I like to like extend the fall feeling as much as I possibly can and read as many books about like creepy forests as possible. Next on my TBR is A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is the second book after From Blood and Ash. So I don't have a physical copy of this book. I have been waiting for Illumicrate to announce the release of the next two books in the series. I have their absolutely beautiful edition of the first book, so I've been waiting to get the second one until, like, look at that. I've been waiting to get the second one until they release it in this edition so that I don't have to buy like multiple copies of it. But I ended up getting the second book on a Kindle deal, so I think it was only like $1.99 or $2.99, and I was like, all right, I've been waiting long enough. I read this book back in January, and it has so much hype online, so I keep seeing it, and I really want to continue the series. I couldn't wait any longer, so I decided to just pick up the next one on Kindle, and I'm going to read it that way. In this series, we are following a main character named Poppy, who is the maiden, and I remember really loving the first book, and it kind of left off at a point where I was like really excited to continue. I read it back in January, and I'm very excited to finally be getting to the second one. Then I want to read Theft of Swords by Michael J. Sullivan. I posted a poll in my Instagram story to see which book I should read next, and it was between Theft of Swords and Malice won, so I have started reading Malice. It's actually on my night table, but Malice is a book that I'm also planning on finishing up in November because I haven't finished yet at the time of filming, but I still do really want to read Theft of Swords as well. This has been on my TBR for a long time, and it's about elves, and I really love elves, and I've heard that it's just like a really fun series, and it's also pretty expansive. This series is called the Rivia Revelation series. There's also the Rivia Chronicles, which I believe predates this series, but it was published after the Rivia Revelations. And then there is another series, it's like a 6-book series that actually like predates everything once again. I do want to dive into this world and see if I want to like read all the things, which I feel like I will. But one thing that I've been debating is that these books were independently published, and then Orbit ended up picking them up and publishing them traditionally afterward. And when Orbit published them, they did bind-up editions. So this is actually a bind-up of the first 2 books in the series. And I can't decide if I'm going to count this as reading 2 books or if I'm going to count reading the bind-up as 1 book. I feel like I should be able to count it as 2 because it technically is 2 books, but I don't know. That's just a thing I've been struggling with. Then I want to read The Heart Principle by Helen Huang. This one came out at the very end of August, and I have been very much looking forward to it, honestly, ever since it was announced, because it follows Kwan, who is one of my favorite people in the family that we follow in this series of books. I've been in such a fantasy mode that I haven't really read much outside of like fantasy and thrillers really. So I kind of want to, I actually feel like I need to have like a month where I like catch up on a whole bunch of romances that I'm behind on, but this is one that I definitely want to prioritize. I believe it's the last one in the series, and it'll also feel really good to like be able to complete another series and take that off my spreadsheet. So this is definitely high priority for me. Then I want to read Bookish and the Beast by Ashley Poston. This is another series finale, so this is part of the Geekerella series. I really enjoyed the first book. It's actually like one of my favorite YA contemporary books. I also enjoyed the second book, not as much as the first, but it was really good. And now I'm so excited to read this third one because it's kind of inspired by Beauty and the Beast, except it's a modern kind of retelling and it involves fandom, and I believe our main character works in a library, and I'm so excited to get to this one. I would also like to read A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett Sinclair. This is a fantasy book that I feel like has been popping up a lot lately. It's a Hades and Persephone retelling, and it is a series. I think there are 2 or 3 books out right now. I think there are 2 books out, and the 3rd book is coming out like early next year, and then I think it's like going to be more than that though, like it's going to be more than a trilogy. So I kind of want to see how I feel about it, if it's worth getting invested in and reading the rest of the series. I honestly don't know anything outside of the fact that it's Hades and Persephone, which is enough for me to give it a shot. As I mentioned, I also want to finish reading Malice by John Gwynne, which I think I will have absolutely no problem doing. I am really enjoying it so far. It is like quite a big book, but it reads pretty quickly, and I think I'm gonna have to pick up the rest of the series very soon. Then I want to read Daughter of the Forest by Juliette Marillier. Honestly, this might actually be like one of the first books that I pick up in November because I've been wanting to get to it for so many years, and it is on my like end of the year TBR that I created for myself. It's one of the books where I'm like, all right, I've had this forever. I am reading this before the year ends, and I've been pretty good at following that. So I kind of want to like make this a very high priority so that I don't have to worry about it in December. And we are following a character named Sorcha, who who lives like kind of a sheltered life, and she has two brothers that she really loves, and she lives with her father, but her father ends up falling in love with this new woman. I believe they get married, and the woman puts her father under a spell, so he is bewitched, and in order to try to save her family, Sorcha ends up leaving the comfort of her home, and she ends up getting kidnapped, but then she also like falls in love, and then she has to like end up choosing between this love of her life or like going back and saving her family. I've heard such amazing things about this series since I first learned of its existence. It's an older fantasy novel, and I'm so excited to finally be reading it. I would also really like to read The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon. It's the first book in a series, and I actually picked this book up back in February, I think, and I really want to get to it before the end of the year. There are currently 4 books that are out, and I have a feeling that I'm going to end up really enjoying it. It follows a girl named Paige who is a clairvoyant, and she is a really rare kind where she's able to dream walk, but she gets attacked and imprisoned, and I believe she ends up kind of falling in love with her captor. And yeah, I'm pretty excited to give it a shot. I've never read any of Samantha Shannon's books, and I feel like this is a good place to start. Then lastly, I also really want to read Good Girl, Bad Blood by Holly Jackson. I read the first book, A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, in October. Really enjoyed it, and I'm very excited to continue the series. It's a YA kind of mystery thriller series. We're following a young girl who is an aspiring journalist, and she ends up solving a case in her hometown. And I haven't actually read the synopsis of the second one, but I imagine there's going to be another murder mystery that she is investigating and potentially solving. So those are all of the books that I'm planning on reading in November. I have quite an ambitious TBR this month, but I feel pretty confident that I will get to most of the books that I mentioned, and hopefully some of the leftovers from last month as well. Let me know what you are looking forward to reading in November, and that's all that I have for this video, so I will see you guys soon in a new one. Bye!